There is a truth people rarely hear before they begin chasing someone's love. Every time you chase, you are teaching the other person what they can expect from you. You are showing them that no matter how distant they become, no matter how slowly they respond, no matter how little effort they offer, you will still move toward them. You will explain more, wait longer, give more, make yourself smaller just to fit into the limited space they leave for you. And once someone learns that you will always be available, that lesson can become very difficult to undo. Maybe something changed last night. It was not dramatic. There was no argument, no final speech, no door slammed shut. Maybe you stayed silent 1 second longer than usual. Maybe you did not answer immediately. Maybe your goodnight message carried a different energy. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, you did not rush to fill the distance with explanations, reassurance, or another attempt to be pleasing. And suddenly, the person who had treated your presence like something replaceable began looking at you differently. Why? The answer may hurt, because the real change was not inside them, it was inside you. Something small shifted in the way you showed up, and that shift may have activated something in their mind that neither of you fully controls. Stay with this, because this is not cheap motivation. It is not another collection of beautiful phrases meant to make you feel better for a few minutes. This is about psychological patterns, what Freud described as the return of what has been repressed, and what Carl Jung explored through the shadow and the persona. Once you understand this dynamic, you may begin seeing it everywhere. Most people believe love is earned by giving more attention, more time, more understanding, more emotional validation, more patience. For months, perhaps, that is exactly what you did. You pursued, you insisted, you adjusted yourself. You became easier, quieter, more available. You kept trying to prove that you were worth choosing, but without realizing it, you may have changed how the other person's mind categorized you. You stopped being unpredictable. You stopped being a question. You stopped representing any emotional risk to their balance. And when the human mind decides something is safe, available, and guaranteed, it often stops paying close attention to it. Not because people are always cruel. Sometimes it is more primitive than cruelty. The brain has a tendency to focus on what might be lost, what changes unexpectedly, what cannot be fully secured. What feels permanently guaranteed can slowly become invisible. It gets taken for granted. That does not mean you are not valuable. It means constant availability can be mistaken for permanence, and many people make a painful mistake at this point. They interpret another person's indifference as proof that they are unlovable, when sometimes the indifference is connected to a pattern of predictability that is formed between them. Then, one night, without planning it, you stop being predictable. Maybe you are tired. Maybe your nervous system has reached its limit. Maybe you finally stop trying to rescue every silence. Maybe you do not send the message you would normally send. Maybe you let the space remain empty. That silence can awaken something Jung spoke about more than 100 years ago, the shadow. The shadow is made of the parts of ourselves we avoid seeing, the fears we bury, the needs we deny, the insecurities we pretend are not there. When someone stops pursuing us, stops feeding us constant validation, or stops making us feel unquestionably chosen, we may be pushed into contact with our own shadow. The fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the fear that we have taken something meaningful for granted. And that may be what happened for the other person last night. But this is where things become complicated. When someone encounters their shadow before they are ready, they do not always respond with maturity. They may react with panic disguised as indifference, or they may appear indifferent while panic is quietly growing underneath. They may check their phone more often than usual. They may start remembering details they once ignored. They may lie awake in that strange space between sleep and waking, asking themselves whether they made a mistake. And before you feel too satisfied by that possibility, pause for a moment, because you have probably done this too. At some point in your life, you may have taken someone's love for granted, someone who cared deeply, someone who was there, someone whose presence felt so familiar that you did not fully recognize its value until they were exhausted, distant, or gone. Only then did you understand what they meant to you. That is not always a coincidence. It can be a pattern. Freud called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate emotional dynamics again and again, even when they hurt us, even when we swear that this time will be different. Write pattern in the comments if this feels familiar. The difficult truth is that people do not always change because they suddenly understand love. Sometimes they change because they become afraid of loss. And although fear of loss can look like love at first, it is not automatically the same thing as mature love. Now let's go deeper. What happened last night was not only a shift in your behavior, it may have created a crack in the other person's persona. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the social mask we wear in the world. It is the version of ourselves that knows how to appear distant, busy, composed, desirable, difficult to reach, or emotionally unaffected. While you were chasing, that person could wear their persona comfortably. They could act unavailable because, on some unconscious level, they believed you would remain there. You would wait, you would seek, you would validate. You would keep the emotional connection alive for both of you. But when you stopped pursuing, even briefly, the mask lost its audience. And a mask without an audience can begin to crack. Behind it, something may appear that the other person did not expect to feel. Emptiness. Not a vague emptiness, a specific emptiness attached to your name, your face, your messages, your attention, your presence. Before, your availability may have filled that space automatically. They did not have to earn it. They did not have to protect it. They did not have to consciously choose it every day. It was simply there. And when a person stops receiving something that had become constant, they do not only notice its absence, they begin asking why it disappeared. If that question remains unanswered, it can grow into fixation. Not necessarily because they suddenly love you more than before, but because the mind struggles with an abrupt imbalance. A variable they believed was fixed has changed. Freud connected this kind of reaction to loss anxiety, the unconscious fear of losing something, or someone that had quietly become part of everyday emotional structure. It may not begin as love. Sometimes it begins as the shock of a missing habit, and habits, when they disappear, can hurt more than the ego wants to admit. So ask yourself something honestly. Do they value you as a person, or do they value the comfort of having you available? That question is uncomfortable because the answer matters. It may reveal whether this is the beginning of a genuine reconnection, or whether their ego is simply reacting to the possibility of losing access to you. There is another layer to this. When you changed your energy without explaining yourself, you may have touched what could be called a narcissistic wound. This does not mean the other person has pathological narcissism. It does not mean you should diagnose them. This exists in ordinary human beings to different degrees. Most people carry a part of the ego that wants to feel chosen, wanted, important, and prioritized. When you silently communicate that you will no longer chase in the same way, the other person may feel, deep down, that they are losing control over your emotional availability. And for the ego, that can feel like a quiet but powerful injury. They may not even be aware of it, but the attempt to soothe that discomfort can look very familiar. Sudden messages that never came before, attention that seemed absent for months, warmer looks, unexpected interest, a feeling that the entire relationship has been restarted in one night. This is where you need to be careful. A sudden approach is not always proof of real love. Sometimes it is an attempt to restore the ego. And understanding the difference may determine whether you build something healthier or fall straight back into the same exhausting cycle. Think about your own life. How many times have you chased someone or something with desperation, only to notice that when you finally stopped chasing, it seemed to move toward you again? That was not necessarily fate. It may have been psychology. There is a conditioned form of desire in which we want more intensely what appears to be moving away, while we can lose interest in what feels completely secure. This is not just a dramatic idea from social media. It reaches into the foundations of human attachment. Attachment research begun by figures such as Bowlby, and later expanded by generations of psychologists, suggests that people regulate emotional closeness partly through the availability they perceive in others, not only through the amount of love they objectively feel. Which brings you to another difficult question. Did this person love you less before? Or did they simply feel no urgency to show love because you were already there, without conditions, without limits, without expectations. Many people never admit this. Love offered without limits does not always create endless gratitude. Often, it creates comfort. And comfort, when it is never balanced by respect, boundaries, or personal independence, can weaken desire faster than an argument, a mistake, or a period of distance. But now we have to move beyond the other person's mind, because the most important transformation is not happening inside them, it is happening inside you. When you stopped chasing last night, perhaps without even intending to, something may have broken open inside you too. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a quiet boundary your unconscious finally placed without asking your permission. Maybe it was your body and nervous system refusing to continue carrying an emotional burden that had been building for weeks or months. For a long time, your self-worth may have been held hostage by the other person's responses. A fast reply made you feel important. An ignored message made you feel invisible. A warm tone made you feel safe. A cold tone made you question everything. Without realizing it, your inner peace rose and fell according to the behavior of someone who may not have been committed to protecting that peace. Psychologically, this can resemble an external locus of control. When your emotional stability depends heavily on conditions outside of you, especially on the reactions of another person, it does not always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like devotion. It looks like patience. It sounds like, I just know how to love deeply. But beneath that language, there can sometimes be dependency dressed up as virtue. And that is one of the hardest things to face. You may not have been loving this person from freedom. You may have been loving them from fear of losing them. Fear can wear the clothing of love, but it rarely creates a healthy relationship. It creates hypervigilance. It creates anxiety that looks like dedication. It makes you watch every pause, every message, every change in tone, every delay, every sign that you might be losing the connection. But last night, something in you may have said, enough. Perhaps you did not say it out loud. Perhaps you did not even recognize it as an act of strength. But that quiet pause may have been the first moment you stopped abandoning yourself. And that is why the other person may be seeing you differently now. Respect is not always requested. Often, it is reflected. Without saying a word, you may have reflected something you had not shown for a long time, that your well-being no longer depends entirely on their approval. For another person's unconscious, that can be a powerful signal. Write enough in the comments if you are tired of abandoning yourself. When you stop chasing, you do not only change how the other person sees you, you begin changing how you relate to yourself. Slowly, even awkwardly, you start reclaiming pieces of your identity that you placed on the altar of the relationship. You begin having thoughts that do not revolve around, why did they not text me? Why did they take so long? What did I do wrong? How can I make this better? You recover mental space. You recover energy. You recover the ability to exist without constantly interpreting another person's behavior. And even if that recovery is small, it can be felt. It shows in your voice. It shows in the way you look at them. It shows in the energy you bring into a room. Human beings are extremely sensitive to changes in people who matter to them, even when they cannot explain rationally what has changed. Jung might describe this as a partial movement toward individuation, a moment when you begin to stop defining yourself entirely through another person's gaze and start returning to your own psychological center. And here is the uncomfortable twist. The person you love may not be reacting only to your absence. They may be reacting to the version of you that has begun to exist without desperately needing them. That version can feel far more attractive than the version of you that begged for attention. But be careful. This is exactly where many people lose everything they have just begun to recover. The moment the other person sends an unexpected message, offers a warmer look, or shows renewed interest, old fear can return with enormous force. And that fear says, explain yourself, be available immediately, give more than before, make sure they do not leave again. So you rush back into over-explaining, over-giving, over-texting, and pursuing twice as intensely, as though you must compensate for the moment you stepped back. That is often where the progress collapses, Because if you begin chasing again the moment you receive a little warmth, you may be confirming to the other person's unconscious that your unlimited emotional availability is still waiting for them. No conditions, no boundaries, no change. And the respect that began to form can dissolve within days. This is why the shift cannot be a temporary strategy designed to get someone back. It has to become a genuine transformation in the way you treat yourself. If it is only a tactic, the other person may sense it sooner or later, even if they cannot explain why. People often detect the difference between authentic change and manipulation disguised as emotional maturity. So be brutally honest with yourself. Do you truly want this person to value you for who you are? Or do you simply want them to stop ignoring you? Those are not the same desire. If all you want is for them to stop ignoring you, you may continue repeating the same loop. You chase, they withdraw. You pull away, they become interested. You chase again, they withdraw again. It becomes an exhausting emotional cycle. Freud would recognize it as repetition compulsion, an unconscious attempt to resolve an old wound through a familiar kind of relationship. Maybe the wound began in childhood. Maybe it came from a distant parent. Maybe it came from a mother who gave attention only when you achieved something. Maybe it came from a father whose affection felt difficult to earn. Maybe it began with a first love who taught you that affection was conditional. Ask yourself, who did you chase before this person? Who first taught you that love had to be earned? Because sometimes you are not in love only with the person in front of you. Sometimes you are attached to the pattern itself. You are reliving the same original wound, hoping that this time you will finally receive the ending you did not receive before. On the surface, that can look romantic, but psychologically, it can become one of the most painful forms of self-betrayal. If you do not recognize the pattern, name it, and face it directly, you may repeat it with this person. And if this relationship ends, you may repeat it with the next person, then the next. The name changes, the face changes, but the emotional script remains almost exactly the same. That is why what happened last night should not be treated as the end of the story. It should be the beginning of a deeper question. Am I creating a healthy relationship, or am I only winning one small battle inside a cycle that has been defeating me for a long time? Now let's go even further. When the other person began seeing you differently last night, it may not have happened only because of your behavior. You may have activated one of the oldest mechanisms of human desire, genuine uncertainty. Not calculated uncertainty, not cold manipulation, not a game. Real uncertainty that emerges when someone is no longer completely predictable. From an evolutionary perspective, the brain pays attention to change. What remains constant does not always register as danger or opportunity, so the mind often spends less energy on it. But something that shifts unexpectedly immediately activates attention. It becomes information that needs to be processed. Your behavior may have stopped being the constant variable in the other person's mind. And suddenly, without warning, you became relevant again. Something they needed to examine, something they needed to understand, something they could no longer automatically ignore. But remember this, renewed attention is not automatically mature love. At first, it may simply be attention. It may be reawakened curiosity. It may be an ego reacting to a perceived threat within its emotional territory. What determines whether this becomes real and deep or fades after a few weeks depends on what happens next. It depends on whether you remain faithful to the version of yourself that stopped chasing, or whether you rush back the moment you feel the first trace of warmth. That difference separates people who genuinely transform a relationship from people who only create a brief pause before returning to the same painful place. There is another part of repetition compulsion that people often miss. It does not only appear in the people you choose, it can also appear in the way you react when you finally receive what you thought you wanted. When that person began showing interest again, you may have felt two opposite emotions at once: relief and distrust. Relief because you are finally receiving the attention you waited for. Distrust because some protected, ancient part of you does not believe it will last. That distrust is not necessarily paranoia. It can be emotional memory. Your unconscious remembers every time you trusted too quickly and were hurt. It remembers every time you lowered your guard and paid a price for being vulnerable. So now, even if you consciously want closeness, your defensive system may be activated. It may be ready to sabotage the very connection you have been wanting, simply to protect you from pain you have experienced before. Freud might describe this as tension between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. Part of you wants to move closer because emotional pleasure is calling you. Another part of you, shaped by past experience, warns that moving closer could lead to suffering again. When that inner conflict is not consciously understood, it can come out indirectly. You become distant at the moment you should allow closeness. You become sarcastic or ironic when you should be vulnerable. You begin creating small tests without realizing it, trying to see whether this time will truly be different. And if you do not recognize these self-protective mechanisms, you may end up sabotaging what you hoped for at the exact moment it begins to appear. So let's look clearly at the anatomy of what may have happened last night. First, your behavior changed, whether consciously or unconsciously. Second, that change interrupted a pattern the other person had normalized. Third, the interruption activated their psychological alert system, creating discomfort, curiosity, or both at once. Fourth, that discomfort pushed them, even briefly, toward their own shadow, fears of abandonment, a need for control, and a latent wound in the ego. Fifth, in an effort to reduce that discomfort, they may have tried to restore the connection with you. That could be the approach, message, attention, or renewed warmth you noticed last night. But this is essential. That approach is only the first step in a much longer process. It is not a resolution. It is only the opening of a door that may have been closed for a long time. What happens after that open door depends on the psychological capacity of both people. It depends on whether you can sustain this new level of self-respect without slipping back into desperate pursuit. And it depends on whether the other person can transform an ego reaction into genuine connection, based on conscious choice rather than fear of loss. Now look at yourself without excuses. Can you hold on to this new version of yourself even if they become distant again? Or was your shift last night only a temporary pause, an unconscious performance that will collapse the moment they show you warmth? Because your real value is not proven when someone suddenly begins looking at you differently. Your value is revealed when you choose to keep your dignity, even if they never look at you that way again. If your peace depends completely on them maintaining this new interest, then you have not truly changed. You have only changed the form of your dependency. Before, you depended on their constant attention. Now, you depend on their renewed attention. It may look like progress, but it can still be the same psychological prison with different decoration. Real transformation happens when your self-worth no longer depends on another person's behavior. When you can deeply want them to come closer without desperately needing them to make you feel whole. That difference between wanting and needing is the invisible line between healthy love and trauma-based attachment. Write freedom in the comments if you understand that difference. And perhaps this is the rawest part of the entire reflection. Maybe last night was not truly about them. Maybe it was about you recognizing, for the first time in a long time, that you deserve more than the emotional misery you had been living in. Maybe that quiet enough was not a strategy to recover anyone's interest. Maybe it was the healthiest part of your psyche, finally rebelling against years of self-abandonment disguised as unconditional love. If that is true, then what you need to protect now is not the relationship at any cost. It is the version of you that finally said, enough. Because here is the real turn in the story. They may not have changed because they love you more than they did before. They may have changed because you stopped giving unlimited access to something they had never needed to earn, protect, reciprocate, or consciously appreciate. And if you maintain that change, it may not only transform how they see you, it may transform how you see yourself. What happened last night was not magic. It was not fate. It was psychology moving through a human relationship in the way it often does. Desire can be awakened by uncertainty and weakened by absolute certainty. Respect grows through boundaries, not through unlimited self-sacrifice. And lasting love does not grow from terror of losing someone. It grows from the conscious choice to be with someone, even when you are capable of being alone and at peace. So the question that matters is not whether they text you today, tomorrow, or next week. The question is this: will you use this moment to fall back into the same old pattern, chasing the moment you feel a little warmth? Or will you use it as the beginning of a real transformation, where your worth no longer depends on anyone's gaze, not even the gaze of the person you love? Write ready in the comments if you choose yourself without closing your heart.